I'll just take this transcription off because that's very okay. All right, so if I share my screen, can everybody see what I'm seeing? Can you give me a thumbs up? Yeah, I can see a nod. I can see Lynn giving me a nod. So that's brilliant. So I'm Sally Smith. I'm one of the clinical leads from the parent and infant relationship team. And this hour-long session today is going to be delivered by our paediatric pair staff nurse, Lynne Moss, who's completed the presentation. She's written the presentation herself. And this is looking at the impact of having a sick or premature baby and how it can affect the parent-infant bond. So without further ado, there'll be time for questions at the end, but I can keep an eye on the chat. So if you've got any questions to ask, please just bob it in the chat. But without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Lynn.
Okay, hi, thank you, Sally. And hi, everybody. And yeah, Sally, thanks for asking me to take part today. So as Sally said, my name is Lynn. I am the paediatric nurse in PAIR, and my nursing background is paediatric ITU and neonates, and I've been with the PAIR team since January 2024. There's a lot of information captured on the slides and in the presentation overall, but like Sally said, we're recording, so hopefully it will be easy to rewatch and follow up as needed. And we really welcome feedback on all the lunchtime learning sessions, but from a professional perspective, but also from a personal perspective for this one, as we know from recent BLISS data that approximately 1 in 7 babies born here in the UK will require admission to a neonatal unit each year. So this presentation then will hopefully provide an overview for everyone involved in supporting families when their baby is admitted to a neonatal unit and during the early period, the discharge period, after they've gone home. And it offers a look at babies' experiences and that of parents facing the challenges of bonding with and caring for a premature or sick baby and the things professionals can do to support them. And so particularly in the last decade, the mental and emotional well-being of babies and their families has been increasingly in focus in both primary and secondary healthcare settings. And there's strong evidence that the long-term physical and emotional health outcomes for babies born prematurely or with complex healthcare needs are significantly improved when parents are given timely and effective professional support to care for and bond and build a strong relationship with their babies. Next slide, please, Sally. So to open this session then, I've included a prose poem from a lady by a writer called Emily Pearl Kingsley. And Emily worked as a writer for Sesame Street, and she's now also a children's rights activist involved in amplifying the voices of children with additional needs worldwide. And Welcome to Holland is reproduced here with her kind permission for the PAIR team. And I'll just pause for a second and give everybody a chance to read it. And next slide, please, Sally. Hopefully everybody's had time to read through. Okay, so hopefully Emily's words will help highlight what it can feel like when a family's pregnancy and birth experience results in very different outcomes from what might have been expected. And our aim as a PAIR team is to provide a brief overview here of the possible impact on families and their babies of preterm birth, and the definitions of that are on the slide. or of having a baby for whatever reason being cared for on a neonatal unit. And it's the very beginning of many families' experiences of visiting Holland, when for many months they may have been expecting and planning for Italy. Human babies are completely dependent on their parents for survival and arrive in the world with innate features designed to help parents look after and bond with them. They, in other words, they're born ready to relate. And from a parent and infant relationship perspective, admission to a neonatal unit presents a huge disruption to the natural bonding process, which begins pre-birth. The reasons for neonatal admission are complex and specific to each individual baby. However, some of the most common reasons include prematurity, obviously, respiratory difficulties, feeding difficulties, temperature regulation, hypoglycemia, the need to stabilize blood sugar, infections, jaundice, birth trauma, very low birth weight, needing surgery, and various congenital complications such as cardiac or gastrointestinal issues. And the list is long, and parents describe the experience of having a baby in the NICU as an emotional roller coaster. Next slide, please, Sally. So this emotional roller coaster felt by parents alongside the physical and the financial and social and relational stresses all associated with NICU can be attributed to the fact that premature babies, depending upon how early they've arrived into the world, are also crucially neurodevelopmentally less able to respond to their caregivers in the same ways as babies born at term. I'm sorry, I'll stop for a moment so make sure I've got the right slide, and allow everybody to just have a look at this slide for about 20 seconds or so, because it touches upon the sensory experience of babies, premature babies cared for in the NICU. Have a little look at those. So the excellent Ready to Relate Neonates link is on the slide there. And that's given alongside the Australian website for parents, which also addresses the sensory and bonding experiences of NICU babies and their families. The roller coaster continues to apply in the early weeks and months once babies are well enough to be discharged home. Their NICU experience, their level of prematurity, and neurological development at birth will in part shape their response to the environment and their parents and their caregivers at home. Premature babies' early connection seeking and communication cues are different, more subtle, and often difficult to interpret. And it's worth noting that babies' communication and connection and seeking cues will be disrupted by the stay in the NICU, particularly those who are very premature or unwell, and the ones that require many medical interventions as well. For example, they'll often require respiratory support, sedation, full ventilation, and often nasogastric feeding, and thereby disrupting the oxytocin release and the opportunity to bond through normal responsive infant feeding. So being cared for then in the carefully controlled but restricted environment of an open resuscitator or an incubator also puts a physical barrier between NICU babies and their parents. And so for all these reasons and more, the early separation of parents and premature or sick babies impacts heavily on the bonding process, as parents are not able to easily learn their baby's connection seeking or engagement and disengagement cues. Next slide, please, Sally. So I'll pause again briefly, just to have a little look at this slide just for 30 seconds. Okay, so engagement and disengagement cues. So premature babies use body language, as do all babies, to tell you how they're feeling. And crucially, it presents differently from term babies, particularly at the very beginning. So immaturity at birth leads to an increased sensitivity to light, to noise and touch, and where a well-term baby may hold eye contact and sneeze or cry or frown, or sometimes they exhibit all four behaviours at once, to alert a caregiver to its needs. An overwhelmed premature baby in the early days may simply have an altered breathing pattern, subtle changes in skin colour, limb movements may be jerky, ill-coordinated movements of the arms and legs, for example. Fingers may be splayed, they might be sick, try to cover their face with their hands, or just grimace facially, quietly, and eye contact is often very minimal. As they get a little bit older, as they grow, body language in premature infants, babies who've been born a little bit early, changes and becomes more coordinated. And as with all babies, premature infants will have many different states of alertness, and the Brazelton link on the slide there is excellent for baby states. The key difference with premature babies is that they will move through these states quickly and unpredictably often. Signs that a premature baby is starting to feel settled will include regular, relaxed breathing, obviously a relaxed body, gentle or smoother movements, and a still, alert face when awake. And as they increase in maturity, they begin to be awake for longer periods, just like term babies, and gaze calmly, more calmly at the faces of caregivers and take an interest in their environment. So the physical, emotional, and psychological legacy of prematurity and the need for NICU, a NICU stay on longer-term infant mental well-being, as well as postnatal mental well-being of parents, can be profound, and the impact it can have on the parent-infant relationship is expanded upon in the next slide. Please, Sally. So parental mental health and the separation roller coaster. So the report highlighted at the top found that there's disruption to the parent-infant relationship, and when babies are in the NICU environment, it increases the risk of maternal perinatal mental health deterioration by approximately 40 to 50%, and that's pretty high. I think everybody can agree. So previous pre-existing mental health issues can be a contributing factor alongside birth trauma, ongoing complexities of care, pregnancy-related anxiety and stress, which carries over, social isolation, guilt at own perceived failure to have a healthy baby, that's really common, being witness to the suffering of other parents in a NICU, I think that's often overlooked, existing permanently in a state of nervous activation, nervous system activation, and feeling the need to ask permission to care for their baby, hold their baby in that NICU environment. So enforced separation as well from partners, extended family, sometimes the new baby's siblings, and financial worries. It has a big impact, as we know, on household finances when there's an extended stay in hospital for new babies. And crucially, the disempowerment, I think, of watching the baby in pain during invasive procedures and not being able to intervene. I think that's a deep violation of what it means to be a parent and to protect and keep one's own baby safe. And as one parent who's also a doctor put it, that there is so much loss involved with a neonatal stay. You habituate to all of this and then finally process it at home. So once home, then parents will reflect often on the many layers of loss involved in their experience of having a baby on the neonatal unit and grieve for their lost weeks of pregnancy, which is often something that gets overlooked. The rites of passage, the many rites of passage that exist in a normal experience that they may have missed. Previous avenues of support can have often drifted as friends and family have returned to their lives when the new baby was in the hospital. And once home, the NICU team, of course, are no longer there 24/7. And that transition can be frightening and really disorienting for parents. So long after the NICU, the trauma of the experience can linger. Ordinary events, such as a now older and potentially more robust baby catching a cold, can be hugely triggering. And tiny things such as that can make NICU parents catastrophize and expect the worst. And as an ex-NICU parent myself, I can vouch for that. And of course, this may be especially true if a family's previous experiences of pregnancy and the NICU environment have ended in a tragedy, which is often the case. Sometimes it's not the only time they've been in that environment. And so any subsequent post-neonatal experience can hold both grief and joy as they finally are able to bring their babies home. Next slide, please, Sally. So FI care and links to home. So in the last decade, especially, widespread introduction of what's known as a family integrated care model in the NICU alongside traditional transitional care provision is helping parents in their transition from hospital to home, alongside the invaluable work of people like the neonatal outreach teams up and down the country, helping families to feel less isolated. And our own Mid Yorkshire Neonatal Unit has a dedicated web page, which is linked on the slide there. In Wakefield and Dewsbury particularly, there are 2 neonatal buddies, family and baby groups, which allow for sort of a degree of continuous care, familiar faces, run by the neonatal outreach team. They run every fortnight, and one group takes place at Stanley Family Hub, and the other is based in Dewsbury at Pentland Infant and Nursery School. The link is, and more details are on the final slide of this session. And they're also on Facebook as well. You find them on Facebook. So the feedback from families attending these groups is one of relief at the professional support offered, but most importantly, I think the peer support that's there, meeting other parents who've had similar experiences in neonatal care and who understand the roller coaster that we just described earlier. The buddies groups also offer support in terms of signposting to other providers, such as Bliss, the perinatal mental health team, infant feeding teams, 0 to 19, PAIR team, various other supports, and Wakefield Send offer as well as appropriate. So one thing to remember though is despite the overall national improvement in partnership working with parents and caring for their babies in a hospital, exemplified by the FI care model, and the support networks in place outside of NICU, the recent Small Things charity report that we highlighted earlier found that every year families face an agonising journey of uncertainty and trauma through neonatal intensive care. And in addition, the journey doesn't end when they leave the NICU, and the needs of families and children born prematurely will last long after they've left hospital. Next slide, please, Sally. So nearly about halfway through, guys, not much longer. So how can we, as professionals from all backgrounds, better support neonatal families and their babies to build strong parent-infant relationships and improved long-term outcomes as well for all concerned? And so far, this sort of brief presentation has been a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the many things parents and babies are faced with when admission to a neonatal unit is part of their initial parenting and early life experience, that as highlighted in the Welcome to Holland poem earlier. And so as a PAIR team, we are primarily involved with families who have left the hospital environment. And so what do we know about what impacts and what helps NICU families once they've finally arrived home? So for this particular slide, I've highlighted 4 main points for consideration which accompany it, and I'll just run through them, and hopefully it'll begin to make sense. So firstly, as touched upon already, the sensory experience of a baby in NICU may have been one of stimulation bombardment, and sometimes stimulation deprivation. And so the noise, the lights, the association of touch with pain can all lead to longer term sensory difficulties, making these babies, sometimes called neonatal graduates, much more jumpy and less easy to settle than babies who haven't experienced a NICU environment. And so raising awareness of the likelihood of this with parents, pre and post discharge, and offering understanding that the emotional impact of being alone at home without hospital staff present to reassure may heighten their feelings of stress. And so it's a helpful and crucially trauma-informed approach to take, to be aware of that. Conversely, you often find that NICU parents are also the experts on their babies and may well find themselves teaching community-based staff regarding their baby's experience, their NICU experience, and ongoing healthcare needs. And so being open to hearing that experience and acknowledging what we don't already know will build trust, and this in turn helps staff to work more effectively with those families, whatever their baby's health needs might be. supporting and acting as a conduit and following up with the many avenues of support, digital and otherwise, that are linked here. So organisations like Bliss, the Lullaby Trust, and Ready to Rate, like we mentioned before, Ready to Relate Neonatal, alongside face-to-face support such as the Buddies groups, Dad Matters, local send and peer support where appropriate. There are ways of offering additional ongoing support to NICU families. Secondly, understanding families' actual individual support networks. So at the point of discharge is also key to recognising what may be needed in terms of additional professional support outside their NICU world. Things to think about, such as financial, social, emotional and practical. Many NICU babies will have and continue to have ongoing additional healthcare needs, sometimes surgery, health investigations, and parents can be completely overwhelmed by this alongside their normal everyday life and obviously sometimes the needs of older children. And also be avoidant, therefore, of initially socializing outside of the family, sometimes due to concerns around infection, and also needing to learn how to be parents outside of that NICU environment as well. And so as a pair team, we often find that some of these families are very socially isolated. And they advise us that the early visiting and building of relationships before they go home by community and primary healthcare professionals from whatever background can really make the difference in how supported they feel by those professionals once home. Because if they know their providers, there's continuity of care, and they just feel more confident going home. They don't have to keep on telling their story. And so that trauma-informed communication allows parents the space to process what's happened in a more supported way with people they know. And that's exemplified by things like the CONI programme, which is the care of the next infant, which is linked on the slide there. And they can return to their experiences and repeat questions as needed with people they've built up some trust and relationship with. And I think it's crucial as well at this point just to remind ourselves that anxious brains, these parents are very anxious and they take longer to process information. They will have often been in a state of nervous activation for weeks. And so their feelings need to be validated and normalised by well-informed, trauma-informed staff. And things like, just simple things like the baby's first bath at home and first feed at home, the first cuddle by siblings, they're all hugely important in establishing and, reasserting the norms and routines for these NICU families. Nearly done on this slide, guys. So thirdly, artificial feeding in the NICU, sometimes coupled with neurodevelopmental difficulties, can impact on a baby's ability to learn to feed effectively, either at the breast or the bottle. And some babies will go home with a nasogastric tube in situ, and parents are often taught how to safely give NG feeds and pass an NG tube and deal with emergencies. And some babies may also go home with nasal tubes for low flow oxygen delivery, for example. And so these things, all of these different needs can all impact on a baby's early feeding and bonding experience, and cause additional stress for them, babies and parents. And as is often the case, by the time a NICU baby goes home, the mothers will have been discharged by their midwives, by the midwifery team, and therefore the practical and emotional feeding support will be offered by neonatal outreach, family's health visitor, local infant feeding organisations such as FAB, obviously the 0 to 19 feeding team, which are linked via the Children's Health Service app. There's a link there as well. Can all help support families who wish to continue with or increase breastfeeding or find themselves with difficulties once home, and can advise on other early infant feeding issues such as possible tongue tie. And it's worth sort of repeating that health visitors and GPs are best placed to spot and follow up with appropriate secondary care referrals once babies are cared for at home, where ongoing issues such as swallowing difficulties or speech and language may require longer term secondary as well as primary care support. I think that's quite key. And lastly, for this slide, babies will often have experienced numerous caregivers in the NICU and may have been there for many weeks, sometimes months. That's really common. Sometimes they will have moved sites during their hospitalised early life, such as is the case in Leeds sometimes. And the changes and the travel from hospital A to hospital B, if they've had to be moved, and the new environmental unfamiliarity may, along with all the other difficulties they've encountered, cause a baby's nervous system to become ever more activated. And so the point there is that attachment and bonding with caregivers is more likely to be interrupted as premature and or term babies separated from parents are going to be less able to easily communicate their physical and attachment needs. And just lastly, for parents, when a new hospital's in the mix, a new set of rules and regulations and relationships will also have to be re-navigated before they eventually get to transition home. I hope that's okay. So next slide, please, Sally. So babies' ongoing health needs and the long-term outcomes and needs of siblings. So as has been really briefly explored very quickly, as with any transition, change, even when positive, can be frightening. And discharge home definitely doesn't always equal the removal of physical, psychological and emotional distress for babies and families. Parents can be faced with a whole new set of challenges at discharge. And the list I'm going to read out now isn't complete, but these are some of the main challenges that they found. So the first one, crucially, we find an awful lot of the time gets referred into PEAR, challenges around sleep. Parents can be very frightened to let their baby sleep without being closely monitored electronically as well as personally, which obviously has its impact. Finances and work. Depending on the NICU outcome, there can be massive strains develop, as you've said, around money and relationships and family life, particularly if one of the parents has had to stop work or take a longer break from work due to caring demands of a new baby that may have additional needs. Caring for older children alongside a baby with possible additional needs can also be a challenge. There may be grief and overwhelms and feelings of loss or guilt about their role as parents for all the children in the family, which can lead to deterioration in mental health. And I think this one's quite crucial. So depending on geographical area in primary care, each new health issue for ex-NICU babies is often treated by lots of professionals involved as an episode of care, rather than seen in a holistic way by one coordinating team, as you often find in secondary care, such as NICU. So identifying overall health needs, therefore, can become harder for both parents and professionals, as oftentimes if it's treated as an episode of care, any additional needs can be missed, resulting in delayed treatment or support. The fifth sort of challenge is longer-term prematurity-related health complications for ex-NICU babies can lead to difficulties and delays in accessing appropriate nursery and school provision. And the EI Smart link, which is on one of the slides, I think it's on the final slide, has some excellent resources for play resources for these babies. And professionals from all primary care and public health services are crucial in supporting families in their ability to signpost local support. So things like the family hubs that often get overlooked, as families are struggling to navigate the complexities of local health and educational provision, particularly if they're new to area and lacking in local knowledge. We find that happens quite a lot. As regards siblings, this is a topic all of its own, and sadly there isn't time today to explore the impact on siblings fully. Suffice to say, a new baby in the family being cared for in the neonatal unit can have a major impact on older children for all of the reasons that we've discussed. And on the whole, they will cope best when included and information is shared with them in an age-appropriate and attuned to their needs particularly way. And there are lots of publications which are really good, designed to support siblings of babies cared for in a NICU, and some of them are linked on this slide. And lastly, for this slide, children born prematurely may not be nursery school ready when they're a little bit older, in a way that a baby born at term is likely to be. And the Smallest Things charity has begun something called a Prem Aware Award scheme, which raises awareness of the impact of prematurity on development and learning for schools to sort of become Prem Aware, supports parents and carers, and helps schools recognise the specific learning needs of some of these children. Occasionally they'll have to go back a year and not start with their peers born in the same date. They'll need to be corrected for dates. The link is on the slide for any early years providers accessing this presentation. And also the Twins and Multiple Birth Association link I've put on there too, which has really brilliant resources for parents and professionals. As obviously suffice to say, there are many additional challenges for families with more than one baby cared for in the NICU environment, which, and we're just not covering in this brief overview, but there is some great resources on there. So next slide, please, Sally. Nearly done, everybody. Okay, to finish the presentation then, this slide and the next one, which has all the links on. This is some of the voices of local ex-NICU parents who act as advocates for the voice of their babies, telling us what professionals working with neonatal families can do to help improve that post-NICU support. And I'll just give you a moment to have a little look at some of the comments on the slide before we move to the last one. Last slide, please, Sally. Okay, so the final slide here lists all of the supportive organisations and resources for parents, alongside the ones already presented in the session, and yeah, the professionals mentioned throughout this presentation, and the photographers of two of the members of the really lovely, friendly neonatal outreach team who run the Wakefield and Dewsbury buddy groups. That's Sarah and Louise. And so really just thank you for listening, everybody, and I hope it's been of some use, and I'll hand back to Sally now. Thank you. You're on mute, Sally.
Oh, there's loads of people here. I didn't realise I was been hiding behind my presentation. That's brilliant. Any questions for Lynne? Well, that's absolutely fine. If there are any questions that do pop up, please just drop us a line at the PAIR team. What I will do afterwards is I'll share out Lynne's slides. I'll also share the evaluation form. And if you've got anything that you feel as though you want to add or suggestions for other lunchtime learnings, then please feel free. Like I said, it's been recorded today, so these the YouTube link will be available on the Wakefield Safeguarding Children's Board Partnership website. And if you just put lunchtime learning in there, you should find that. So yeah, thank you everybody for listening, and hope to see you next month. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.